Hey there, I'm Alex Kidman and this is the Samsung Galaxy S24 FE. Let's get into the review. Samsung's FE phones, FE stands for Fan Edition if you cared, have long sat in this slightly odd position. They're basically phones which are better than its Galaxy A series phones, but they're at the bottom tier of its S series phones, but they only ever get released 6 to 9 months after that year's S series phones actually come to market, which means, of course, they're only about 3 to 4 months before the next series of S series phones. But the idea here is meant to have been about value, and the S24 FE is a great value phone. There's an awful lot I like about this phone, and only a few things that I don't. Let's get into the review, first of all, by talking about the design. So being as how the S24 FE sits in the S24 family, it's not exactly a surprise that it looks an awful lot like an S24 phone. I mean, the S24 Plus especially, because it's got the same size display. Here in Australia, the S24 FE will sell in blue, mint or graphite finishes. There are a couple of other colours, and I do find it a little bit odd that Samsung is opting not to bring all the Fan Edition colours of a Fan Edition phone here. But it's not an entirely unusual play for us not to see every colour of a given phone released. And look, honestly, I like a blue phone, and they sent me the blue model, so I'm pretty happy. The Galaxy S24 FE is built around a 6.7-inch 1080 by 2340 pixel, 120Hz capable AMOLED display with Samsung's typically very bright and colourful default presentation. Bezels are minimal, and the phone is wrapped in the same metal frame as its more expensive S24 siblings. It's nicely durable, rated at IP68, and it has Corning Gorilla Glass Victus Plus front and back of the phone to give it an extra layer of protection, and it probably needs it. One criticism I have here, and this is super common amongst front and back glass phones, is that it's kind of slippery in the hand. And I don't have a case for this one, otherwise I would have slapped one on there. But if you are buying this phone, I would say a case is a real must-have for protective purposes. I haven't dropped this one yet, but it feels like it's just a matter of time. One way that the S24 FE is differentiated from the higher-cost S24 phones is in the biometric unlocking. It still uses an in-display fingerprint reader, but it's a simpler optical reader rather than the ultrasonic reader that you get in Samsung's true flagship phones. Now, that is a tad slower than I recall the S24 Ultra that I tested earlier this year being, but not to a level where I've really felt like it's annoyed me. It's worked well enough. It's definitely not a top-tier fingerprint reader, but it's good enough. On the camera front, the Galaxy S24 FE features a trio of lenses at the rear, with a primary 50-megapixel wide lens, secondary 12-megapixel ultra-wide, and an 8-megapixel telephoto 3x lens, capable of punching up as high as 30 times with hybrid zoom. At the front for selfies, you get a 10-megapixel sensor to play with. And look, that's a lesser camera recipe than you get on the S24 phones. That's kind of deliberate. That's playing to a price point for this phone. But it's one that I've generally found to be fairly pleasing in day-to-day testing. Samsung's camera post-processing tends towards slightly oversaturated colours, but a lot of people like that kind of style. And obviously, you can always post-process tweak yourself the photos once you've taken them. I do like the flexibility of having everything from wide to a decent telephoto lens at my disposal, and the Galaxy S24 FE runs this gamut fairly well at its price point, although rather predictably, pushing the telephoto too hard is not a good idea. And I'll give you an example of this. So recently I went to a Cold Chisel gig in Armidale, New South Wales, and there were a bunch of other bands playing before Chisel went on, including Birds of Tokyo. And so during their set, I put the S24 FE through its telephoto paces. Here's a shot of where I was sitting with the ultra-wide lens, which kind of makes it look like I was actually a bit further away from the stage than I actually was, because that's what an ultra-wide lens is going to do for this kind of photo. But it's still a good presentation. And the same is broadly true for the wide shot, but obviously I'm still not seeing much of the stage. I'd like to get a bit closer. So if I punch that up to 3x telephoto, it presents okay, although there's an interesting colour cast difference there between the telephoto and wide lenses for sure. And then if I push it through to the next stock setting, which is 10 times, that actually works okay. That's about where I'd say the strength of the telephoto here is, because if I push it up to 20 times, which is the next step, it does start to fall apart rather noticeably. It is starting to get a little weaker, although obviously I can see the stage pretty well now. Now I can push it to 30 times, but yeah, it's not a good look. It really doesn't work all that well at all. Now, to be fair to the S24 FE, lots of phones with these kind of very long zooms do fall apart at their extreme zoom distances there. They're kind of good at peering at things, but they're not good for taking actually pleasing photos that you're going to want to lose. The S24 FE is not alone in this, and arguably it maybe even does a little better than some that I've tested recently. At the front, the selfie camera does an okay job of taking photos of my head. I mean, there's not much I can do to make myself prettier, but it's okay. And of course, because this is a Samsung 2024 phone in its premium range, you also get Galaxy AI features. And that means I can use its Portrait Studio feature to render myself in 3D or as a sketch. But, well, I found this with its other phones this year. The results are not great. I mean, I never really realized that I looked this much like Homer Simpson, for example. And as for the sketches, well, wow, I'm very angry in a kind of John Moxley way. But look, maybe it's just me. What if I set the Galaxy S24 FE a challenge? So from that same gig I was at earlier, I took a photo of Cold Chisel's Ian Moss just on one of the video screens, because again, I was a long way from the stage. And look, this is not a great photo, I'm not pretending it is, although it's a pretty good one under the circumstances, given it was dark. Low light presentation on this phone is pretty good. So what happens if I put Portrait Studio and tell it, right, grab that photo, make an Ian Moss for me? Wow. Also, to be clear, no. I mean, wow, that's just really awful and wrong, and all sorts of assumptions have gone on there, and none of them are particularly good. Although, that's the AI side of things. The actual camera itself presents quite well. Video is quite good. Everyday shots are quite good. I'm quite pleased with this camera, generally, but I'd probably leave the AI features alone for the most part. On the performance front, Samsung made some really bold claims about the S24 FE within its price range. And they're bold and really interesting claims too, because it's all based around an Exynos 2400E processor. But that isn't just, it's the Exynos in Australia, it's the Exynos worldwide, and that's not very Samsung, because quite often what they've done is they've had models of their FE phones and other Galaxy S phones that have been Exynos here, but Qualcomm elsewhere, and that's not the case. This is Exynos everywhere. Wherever you buy this on the planet, it'll have the Exynos 2400E as far as I can tell. That's paired up with 8GB of RAM and either 128GB or 256GB of storage. Minor complaint point here, it would have been nice to see microSD expansion, but it's just not a feature. But does the S24 FE live up to those bold performance claims? Yeah, it really does. So, to give that some comparative weighting, here's how it compares using Geekbench 6's CPU test against, well, mostly a range of similarly priced phones. Now, there is one standout here, of course. The Galaxy Z Flip 6 is not a similarly priced phone. Depending on the configuration, you could spend nearly twice the price of the S24 FE on a Z Flip. And I've included that purely because I do want to show off just how good the performance on the S24 FE is. I mean, I could not get hold of an S24 or an S24 Plus from Samsung Australia this year to comparatively test, but I have very little doubt we are punching towards the performance of those phones. The S24 Ultra is a little bit more powerful again, but it's a considerably more expensive phone. This is really good value in terms of CPU performance. And look, the same is true for GPU performance. If I put 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme to this phone against the same crop of phones, we see pretty much exactly the same result. This is a good performing phone that has more than enough power for even the most powerful Android apps right now. I've long said that a lot of flagships have arguably, especially in the Android space, too much power. There aren't that many apps that really push them all that hard. This is going to be able to run the things you want to run now and for some years to come. And that's also true because, like so many of Samsung's other flagships this year, You get 7 years of OS upgrades and 7 years of security updates. Really pleasing to see, really nice to have, and only really Google is matching them in that capacity right now. But for a phone at this price range to have that, it's great. And of course, as I mentioned before, it's 2024, so of course this phone has AI features with Samsung's Galaxy AI. And look, I'm so far in 2024, I'm really just not that impressed with what we're seeing out of AI in these phones. Yes, you can do summaries and text and so on, but look, I'm a writer. I don't need that level of features, and often what it produces is very bland copy, I find. I'm not excited by it, and it's fairly evident that it's AI produced because it's fairly soulless. You also get things like being able to add and subtract from images through Samsung's sketch-to-image manipulation tools, and those can work well. I mean, sometimes they can produce horror shows as well, but as an example, I took this photo of a hat, pretty ordinary photo of a hat, and I thought, right, what happens if I sketch just a little cat face onto that hat? I want to see what it does with that. And contextually, it did really well. It dropped a little cat-shaped pin onto it. It even got the shadows mostly right. That's actually kind of impressive. I am also impressed, though, that Samsung, by default, and you can't disable this, will throw a watermark on there to show that it's AI-generated content. The only fly in the ointment there is that this would be pretty easy to crop out, I feel. Samsung's claims around Galaxy AI is that they will remain free to use through to the end of 2025, and that offer applies to the Galaxy S24 FE as well. So technically you're getting slightly less free Galaxy AI, I suppose, on this phone because the other phones have been out for longer. It's not clear what they're going to charge after that time period, but if those AI features are important to you, you do have to bear in mind that at a certain time you may end up having to pay a monthly fee for them. On the network front, the Galaxy S24 FE tells a pretty predictable story, with 5G sub-6 GHz on board via either a single nano SIM or eSIM. Network conditions obviously can vary, but the Galaxy S24 FE had few issues, hitting my typically seen speed peaks of between 200 to 400 meg in Sydney on the Telstra network. As always, your experience and network conditions can vary. On the battery front, the S24 FE is a pretty big phone, and I kind of expected that it would have your stock standard 5,000 mAh battery, and it doesn't. It has a 4,700 mAh battery, and that's a really interesting play because what I've noticed over the years with Exynos processors is that they have tended to offer better battery performance than the Qualcomm equivalent. Now, there is no Qualcomm equivalent here, but could the use of Exynos actually mitigate against having a slightly smaller battery here? Well, to test that, I put it through my standard YouTube battery test. So that's a 1 hour 1080p video, maximum brightness, moderate volume. And what I'm looking for here is both to hit above 90% battery, because anything that falls below that, very dodgy for lasting a day at moderate usage patterns, but also just to see how it compares against other phones in its price range. And here's how it compares. While it's not best in class, given its CPU and GPU performance, that's still a pleasing figure. And it's one that, certainly lasts out day by day. I can easily get a day's usage of this, unless I'm really hammering it. And that's true of pretty much any phone. Now, for this phone as well, I've actually expanded that test. I'm starting to test these phones up to 3 hours with that test, but this is the first one that I've tested it with, so I don't have comparative figures, but I can show you how it tracks over time for a sustained workload. And there, again, it does pretty well. I mean, you couldn't run YouTube on this phone all day and expect it to last. You're going to have to recharge it at some point, but again, that's true of any phone. Now, the model that Samsung sent me for review is literally the one that I'm holding in my hand, but that's all they sent me. No box, no cable, no nothing. However, the retail box does not have a charger in it, so you will have to supply one of those yourself. It only charges up to 25 watts over USB-C or up to 15 watts wireless, which isn't the fastest in its class by a pretty wide margin. Obviously, you've got your Chinese brands like your Oppos and so on that do insanely fast charging for a lot of their phones, even at this price bracket. You're not going to see that here, so you will have to allocate a little bit of time for charging. So should you buy the Samsung Galaxy S24 FE? Well, look, it's pretty clear to see where Samsung has differentiated out this phone, where it's cut things back to make the S24 series still its premium flagship, at least for a few months. But what it's cut away, broadly speaking, is stuff you probably don't need. This is a really good phone. The performance is really good. The battery life is decent. I quite like the cameras, as long as you stay away from those really extreme zooms. There's just an awful lot to like here, and very little not to like. While it is a little bit regrettable that the FE phones here in Australia have gone up in price year on year, I should note at launch that there's some really good specials on this phone around, and while those specials won't necessarily last beyond the launch period, afterwards, and especially once the S25s come in, we'll probably see another price drop on this. Not officially, but maybe at sale. And that really marks this out as a really good kind of upper mid-range, lower premium flagship priced phone. An easy recommendation, especially if you like the Samsung ecosystem. So that's my take on the Samsung Galaxy S24 FE. Got any questions? Hit me up in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe.
Thank you.